Today we are talking with Gaea Schoeters about her novel Trofee. Gaea is one of the prominent voices of Flemish literature. She is a versatile creator who writes novels, screenplays, and operas. One of her first published works was Girls, Muslims, and Motorcycles, in which she shared the story of her 7-month journey through Iran and Central Asia. Her novel Trofee has become a huge success across Europe. It won the Sabam Prize for Literature and received a special mention for the European Union Prize for Literature. The story is currently being translated into 13 different languages, including Telugu. Trofee is a provocative novel that follows Hunter White, a wealthy American hunter who travels to Africa to complete his Big Five collection by killing a rhino. The story takes a dark, unsettling turn when he is offered an even more exclusive hunt, forcing him to decide if he is willing to cross the ultimate moral line. Through this high-tension plot, Schoeters explores the chilling intersection of white supremacy, global capitalism, and the commodification of human life. The book has gained international acclaim for its muscular prose and its fearless critique of the Western gaze and the lasting effects of colonialism. Here spoke on the occasion of the book's release in Telugu by Chaya Books.
I think I was very lucky because I come from a family where everybody was always reading. I grew up without television. We didn't have a television in the house until I was 18, which also says something about my age because I think these days no one grows up without television or without internet in the house. But in the 70s when I grew up, there was no television there. And so in the evening, we were all reading. And my parents have a very big library. And the rule was always that I was allowed to read every book that I could reach. But what they hadn't thought about probably is that children can climb very well. So I used to climb through the library to all the shelves where the books were that I found interesting. And so I grew up with lots of different books and lots of influences. And one of the really nice rules was also that they always said to me, it's okay if you don't understand everything. There is actually no book which is too difficult for you. It's just sometimes you will only understand the first layer and you can always come back to a book and have another look at it when you're older or when you can come from a different angle. So there are several books that I rediscovered during my life, but actually reading was always the world that I grew up in.
Now, how did you get into writing?
That's a more difficult question because if you look back, it's very easy to say that I was probably always a writer or wanting to be a writer. But if I think at the first moment that I consciously decided that I wanted to be a writer, then I think I must have been something like 13, 14. It started with a film that came out, and the film is called Henry and June. And it is a film about a love story between two authors, Henry Miller and Anais Nin. And my parents took me to the cinema, even though I was not really allowed in because I wasn't 16 yet. And I saw this film with all these writers who spent, it's set in Paris in the 1920s or in the 1930s. And it has this typical atmosphere where writers meet in the evening in a bar and they spend all night discussing the world and discussing the big philosophical questions of the world. And I thought, if writing and being a writer means that you can spend your life thinking about life and about the world that we live in, that's a wonderful future. And that's sort of the idea that I have of what I want to do with my life. And so I told my parents, I would so love to become a fiction writer. And my parents reacted, I think, like most parents would react. And they said, it's a really nice idea, but maybe you have to learn something useful first that you can actually make a living of and that you can make an income with. So I sort of forgot this idea of becoming a writer again. And I, as people do, I very nicely studied something useful. I became an interpreter. And I started to work because after that I studied journalism. I started working as a journalist. And then in 2007, we made a very long trip of 7 months travel, actually.
The interpreter in the sense to English or into which language?
English, Spanish, and also Chinese into Dutch. The Chinese I have completely forgotten. And but so that's sort of what I studied.
Uh-huh.
And I started to work, but mostly as a journalist. And then when we made this longer journey, when we returned from this journey, suddenly there were lots of people saying, would you not want to write a book about this?
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, wait, there was this moment in my life when I wanted to become a writer. Actually, I had, when I was studying, when I was 21, I wrote a youth novel and I sent it to one publisher. And this publisher answered, yeah, it's a very nice story and we see lots of potential in the story, but maybe there are a couple of things that need changing. And because I had no idea how writing actually works, I sort of thought that it was a rejection. So I thought, okay, that means that it's not good enough. So I put it on a shelf and I forgot about this dream. And it's only after this journey, when suddenly there was this question of, would you not want to write a book, that I remembered this idea that I actually had one day wanted to become a writer. And at that point, and I must have been end of 20s, maybe 30 already, I realized, okay, it's actually possible to become a writer.
So you started with nonfiction to begin with.
Yes, my first book was this travel journal or this travel book, which was nonfiction. But it was nonfiction already combined with the ambition of something more than only a travel story, because we made this long journey in the footsteps of two women, Annemarie Schwarzenbach and Ella Maillard, who had traveled with a car all the way from Europe to Afghanistan in the 1930s. And I sort of used their story as part of the book as well, telling their story and reflecting on how has the world changed in between their trip and our trip? If we travel in their footsteps, are there similarities? Are there big differences? What has changed? What has not changed? How different is it to travel as a woman in this world now? And so there was always this ambition of turning it into literature. So it was a logical step after this book to move on to fiction.
And why girls, more Muslims and motorbikes? Title is very intriguing, actually.
Well, actually, we made a trip with two girls on motorbikes.
Okay.
And we had decided to travel through Muslim countries only. And this choice was partially a result of, if we looked at how Muslim countries were discussed in the news, it was always bad news. It was always like, yes, but Iran, for example, is a country where women are oppressed, or it was very often news about terrorism, about extremism, about trouble. And very rarely it were the stories of normal people. For example, what does an Iranian woman do on a Tuesday afternoon between 3 and 4? It was something I could not read anywhere. So I thought maybe I have to go there and look for myself. And also, if we, as two girls on motorbikes, can travel through all these countries of which people say that they are so dangerous and so complicated, and we come back unharmed, then maybe it's not such a big problem at all. And it's interesting to shed a different light upon all these prejudices about these countries. And that's why we actually left on the journey, not because we wanted to do something dangerous or complicated, but just out of curiosity. And I think curiosity and curiosity about the other, or other countries, other people, other cultures, is what drives all my writing. And also this urge to find out, well, the general narrative says this, the prejudice says this, but is this true? Is this the reality? Does it actually fit with what I feel, with what I see when I go there?
You said 1930s, two women, they've already traveled, and you're also referring to their travel and their journey too. What do you think has changed?
I think certain things have become more difficult and other things have become a lot easier. Travel in a logistic way has become a lot easier in the last century. It's become much easier to travel from one place to another, basically because infrastructure has become better and it makes traveling in general easier. On the other hand, I must say I traveled again this year, not for 7 months, unfortunately, but for 2.5 months. And I must say that since the internet exists, this has changed traveling to a very large extent. I was surprised to see that the internet has actually changed the nature of traveling very fast in the last 15 years or so. I think when we traveled before, we traveled because we were curious about the things of which we had no idea, and we had to go somewhere to explore them. And there was also always this urge to talk to people and to exchange experiences, to exchange our view on the world. And also from the other perspective, the countries we traveled to, especially because with a motorbike, you tend to travel to very remote places. Very often we met people who had themselves not traveled beyond their village, and to whom we were actually a source also of knowledge of cultures and parts of the world that they had no access to. Internet has changed it because now that we all have smartphones, first of all, I see many travelers who are very preoccupied with themselves as the center of the travel and not so much interested into the people they meet, but much more looking as if the world is like one big film set and they want to get the perfect Instagram shot where it's all centered on their experience, which I find a pity. When I travel, it's not about me. It's about what happens and the people that I meet. And I don't go there to see the reflection of my own face in my selfie camera. On the other hand, I feel that many of the people we meet also have smartphones. And that means that they now also have an idea, or they think they have an idea of what life in Europe and what life on my side of the world looks like. And this idea very often is also not the reality. It's this projected Instagram image. And so we're both looking into a strange deforming mirror. But the interest in really sitting down and talking to each other for 3 hours to exchange the real conversation and the real questions that we have has actually become smaller. And I think that that is maybe a sad thing that has been caused. The traveling has become easier, but somehow we don't really arrive. We just pass through this illusion together. And that's maybe what I miss, the analog traveling.
Wonderful insight. Wonderful. Now, as far as the life of the women is concerned in these countries, do you see any change?
There is, I think, luckily, a lot of change going on in how women throughout all of the world are getting more access to education. Literacy is going up. Mobility is going up. Mobility for women is also a very important factor. The fact that people are able to move safely from one place to another makes it possible for girls, for example, to have access to education. There is also a general idea, which I found very comforting, that it is important also for women and girls to get an education. Of course, there's counterexamples. There is a backlash. There is countries where women used to have more rights before and now have much less rights than they used to have. And then I think of Afghanistan, but not only. I also think, for example, of America, where the situation of women now is actually, I think, less free than it was 15 years ago, where you see a return to an ideal of the 50s nearly. So it's always a pendulum going in two directions. And I think emancipation is a continuous movement which takes one or two steps forward, then is partially turned back, and then again has to take these steps forward. It's a slow evolution. But I am very happy to see that also in the ambition that many girls have of what they want from life and how they want to organize their lives and what they want to achieve has changed, and that luckily society in many places is following these ideas, that there is that also very many men, and I think that's important, have realized that it's actually more interesting if women play an equal role in public life.
Now we'll move on to the current topic, the trophy. When did the idea occur to you, actually, writing about trophy hunting? It's a very sensitive subject. And when did it occur to you? And was there any specific event?
Actually, if you would have asked me like 5 years before I started working on the book, will you ever write a novel about trophy hunting? I would probably have answered, I have no idea what trophy hunting is, or I have a vague idea what trophy hunting is, but you must be mistaking me for some other writer, because I don't think I'll ever write a book on this subject, because I'm not a hunter. I don't hunt. I've never traveled through African countries, so why would I write a book on this subject? And it all started with a coincidence. Very often stories find writers. It's not always writers who find stories. And I was working on another book and I wasn't really certain how this book should end. So I was scrolling on Facebook, and I like to call it research, but very often it just means I'm desperate and I have no idea how to continue writing. And Facebook sent me a small commercial advertisement. The algorithm sometimes does that, on trophy hunting in Pakistan. And the ad said something like, you can buy a hunting license for this specific kind of ibex, and with the money that is paid for this hunting license, we then support a breeding program and a protection program for precisely the same kind of ibex. And I scrolled on, and as I scrolled on, I thought, wait a minute, what have I actually read? Because it is so absurd, and I had to read it like 3 times before I realized what was actually written. And when I thought it through, I thought what it actually means is that only animals or things in general that you can stick a value to, which is expressed in money, are worth protecting. And that is that's at the same time absurd, but also very perverse. So I was intrigued by this phenomenon and by how it works and the whole mechanism behind it. And I directly started to scroll through the internet, researching this idea of trophy hunting and the discussions on if this actually functions, if it is good for a species or not, what the results are economically, what the biologists think of it, what the hunters think of it. And I thought, oh, it's such a rich subject. Maybe it's something that I should work with. And the deeper I got into this research, the more intrigued I got, because at a certain point I saw a photo of a British photographer, David Chancellor, who has for a long time been following trophy hunters in South African countries. And he has photographed hunters in their trophy rooms. And I had no idea that such a thing existed.
Oh.
But a trophy room it looks like a library, but instead of shelves with books, it's like all these stuffed animals hanging on the wall. So I saw this photo of this man sitting there surrounded by half a giraffe and an elephant's head and a stuffed bear. And what struck me is that the man sitting there looked absolutely normal. I mean, he looked a bit boring, a bit like my accountant. And I thought, who is this person? And why do you suddenly wake up in the morning and decide, I want to travel to an African country and shoot a rhino? And at a certain as soon as this question formed in my mind, I wanted to find the answer. And that's how it starts very often, that I want to know what drives people who are completely different from myself to do the things they do. And that's where the idea of Trofee started.
So you never visited Africa?
I still have not been I have been in Egypt, but I've never been in Africa below the equator or in any African country. And I wondered, of course, because that's that next logical step, should I go there before I write the book? Shall I go there and do my research? Do I have to see what it's like? Do I have to feel what it's like? And it's not always better, I think, to go somewhere before you write a book. Because we always think somehow that if we go somewhere, we have a more objective look on things. And if there's one thing that I learned from traveling is that is maybe not always true, because we go there and we always take ourselves with us. I take myself, I take my prejudice, I take my questions, but I also take my mood. If I go to a country and I'm at that moment freshly in love, then I will always think this is the most beautiful country in the world. If I travel somewhere and I'm not feeling well or I'm ill or my telephone gets stolen, I will like the country a lot less. So I'm not so certain that it's so much more objective to actually go. But for Trofee, I had decided maybe I do have to go. And I had already started planning, and then suddenly COVID came along. And it was not possible to go anywhere. I could not even leave my own house. But this urge to write this novel was so urgent that I thought I can also not wait 1, 2, 3 years for the world to reopen before I write this book. I have to write it now, so I have to find a different way of doing my research. And luckily, my first novel is about the First World War, and I was also not in the First World War, so I have developed a rather good technique of finding a way to explore a subject without actually going there or doing it myself. And I must say, when I think back of it now, maybe I'm happy that I didn't go. I'm not certain I could have written the same book if I had gone there. And I'm not certain I could have done to my characters all the horrible things that I have done to them if I had known them personally. And also, when it comes to objectivity, maybe if we read like 10 or 20 different sources next to each other and different perspectives next to each other, maybe we get a better image of a certain country or a certain problem than if we go there ourselves with my personal objective but always limited view of a thing.
Yeah. In fact, I could guess that you have not visited Africa, in the sense that I know that you have written this novel in the period of pandemic. And nowhere in your bio I could see that you are into hunting or any such things, right? Wildlife photography or anything. But what fascinated me while I was reading the novel is the kind of detail that you have gone into about this habitat, about the hunter's instinct, and various things, the techniques, and various, and how to track the animals and all. What kind of research has gone into this?
Well, I must admit that when it comes to research, I am rather obsessive.
You have been a journalist all through. I think that would have also helped you in this. Yeah, please go ahead. Sorry.
I know, I think it plays, of course, a role also in how I conduct my research, because the good thing with being a journalist first is that I learned the technique of researching that makes it easier to dive into a subject very deeply if you need this knowledge. And if it's hunting or piano playing, which I also cannot do, and which is very important in one of my other novels, I just think you have to take it seriously. It's very important, even though it's fiction, that you take the facts very seriously. You can modify them, you can use them differently, you can play around with them, but you have to know them before you can use them. And I think it has to do with, I always think of a novel like one of these shoe boxes that we used to have when I was a child, with a small hole pierced into it, and then you build something in this box, and this is your world. And that's how I see my novels. And because my characters make very large psychological steps sometimes, and the reader has to be willing to follow these psychological steps, it's very important that this entire set in which it happens, which is to me like a film set, that all the details in the set is correct and genuine. I mean, if I have a crocodile swimming by in a place where crocodiles don't live, the reader will sort of stumble over this crocodile and not trust me anymore, because he'll think this is a mistake, and why would I believe the rest? So I think all these tiny details have to be very well researched in order to enable me to put my characters in this box. And the other thing is, I have to know my characters really well. Also psychologically, I have to know very well who they are, so that they can move freely. Because otherwise, if I put them in the box and I don't know them from the inside, then I have to move them around in this box, and then the reader will all the time see my hand move, which I also don't want. I want to be able to put the character in the box and then remove the hand, and the character will walk freely through this scene that I have thought of. So that means 2-3 years of research, and very thorough research. And when it came to hunting, I was lucky in a sense that I very soon in my research I stumbled over literature, or over a literary genre of hunting stories that not only gave me lots of detail, but also gave me a good insight in the colonial gaze that is behind this great game hunting in the African continent. I mean, in the literary variation, you could think of all the Hemingway novels, but there is also professional hunters who used to work for the government in all these countries in colonial times, who have written about their experiences. And they write very detailed about where precisely should you hit an elephant if you want to kill it with one bullet, which plants do I meet when I'm walking. They also write a lot about their interaction with indigenous people that they collaborate with the guides, with the trackers. And of course, they use vocabulary, which these days we would not use anymore because it has this colonial color to it, but also with great respect for the knowledge of these local people and for what they bring to the hunt. And this gave me, at the same time, access to the psychological world that I was looking for, and a lot of factual detail. And then the other thing is, and here I'm happy that we have the internet, that people upload the craziest things on YouTube. So there were lots of amateur hunting videos that I could look at. And the nice thing about that, it's not like a documentary. It's much more clumsy. It also shows all the mistakes or all the bad character traits of people. For example, there is this one scene where Hunter White sleeps outside and he wakes up at 3 in the night. And then I wonder if he wakes up at 3 o'clock in the night, what does he hear? Which animals are awake? Are there insects awake at 3 o'clock in the night? And how do they sound? Or are there birds awake? And I need to get all these sounds correct. Or if there is a small animal which is like creaching through the grass, does it sound the same when it's a small one and a bigger one? And I actually found uploads of savannah sounds at 1 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock at night, 3 o'clock at night. So people really upload crazy things, which helped me a lot.
Hunter is a very interesting character. In fact, Hunter and Van Heeren, both characters, they fascinated me. Especially coming to Hunter, the way you make us all, believe in Hunter, what he says, and we follow the logic, and suddenly we get a shock and we realize, what am I doing? Who am I empathizing with? Is that the way you designed the character from the beginning, or?
I tend to develop my characters long before I actually start to write, because I think I have to know them really from the inside. And that means that it always sounds a bit funny, and I'm always a bit shy in admitting it, but I talk to them for at least 1 year before I start to write them. And I want to know lots of things from them that are not part of the novel, but that help me to find out who they are. Like, where did you meet your wife? When did you fall in love? Did you have a best friend in college? How was your relationship to your parents? The strangest things. What's your favorite breakfast? Because I need to have this feeling, and most of these things I never need, but they give me a feeling for who is this person. And with another thing is, I very often write about characters which are not sympathetic, not pleasant, and very different from myself. And I have learned through practice that if I have to write them well, and if I do not want to judge them from the outside, because if I judge them, the reader will judge them as well. So I have to find a way to get inside these characters. And the best way of doing that is to find something that we share and not to focus on the differences. And with Hunter White, that was not easy, I must admit. But what I found in the end is that we both feel real love for nature. In spite of all his faults and mistakes, and he has many, I think he loves nature truly. And there we could connect. So there we had a base. And from there, we could explore things where we think very differently. And I tried to do the same with the reader, because what I actually wanted to do with Trofee is I wanted to construct a kind of trap where the reader starts with, yeah, but hunting is nothing for me, and then slowly gets closer to Hunter White and feels the same fascination, and then the novel speeds up, so the reader also doesn't get time to get away from this character, and is pulled into his logic and into his character. And Hunter is very good in explaining why what he does is ethical and how it works, and as he is convincing himself, he takes the reader along. And I wanted to pull the reader towards this point where suddenly you come to this point which you describe so nicely as this shock, where he thinks, have I thought along with this man until this very point? And what does that say about me? Because we sort of only wake up at the moment that the blood is also on our shoes. And I think it also has to do with the notions of colonialism, because we all love to think, yeah, but colonialism is a thing of the past. And if it's not a thing of the past, then it is certainly something of other people. Because me, as a progressive, well-thinking individual, I am very far away of all these colonial notions. Nothing of it is left in me. But I think we have all culturally been so embedded in this logic by everything we are learned, by the history lessons we get, by the literature we read, by the movies we watch, by these typical out of Africa-like images of orange suns coming down, and it's always one man heroic with a rifle in this huge plain. And all these notions are deeply embedded in us. And even though rationally we think we are way past them, instinctively it's not always the case. I was shocked myself at how easy it was for me while I was writing to find all these colonial images. Like also this typical objectification or erotification of the black body, which when Hunter looks at the two hunting boys, all these cliches, we so know them from literature that I could find them very lightly. And also the reader, strangely enough, subconsciously is willing to accept them again. And that keeps the reader close to Hunter White until this point where suddenly there is the shock because we realize where this logic brings us.
And more importantly, see, on one hand, you are talking about, ethics of hunting and trophy hunting and all that. At a deeper level, I would say that you're also, I think it's kind of a discussion on how we humans get attracted to enforcing violence on others, right? That streak in us, to inflict violence on others. I think the novel talks about that too. I find it really fascinating.
I'm afraid one of the conclusions that I came to when writing the novel is that humans are maybe not the nicest animal, far from. There is this very instinctive idea that we can impose our will on all other creatures, and that it is our right, in a way, to decide on the life and death of other species, animals or humans. And I always have to think of there's an Australian ecologist or eco-feminist, Val Plymwood, and she was at a certain point in her life, she was traveling on a river and she was attacked by a crocodile, and the crocodile pulled her out of her boat and underwater, and she fought with this crocodile for 15 minutes and she actually survived it. And she always says that for her, that changed her entire view of the world, because she realized during this fight with this crocodile that, first of all, humans are not necessarily always the predator, but can also be a prey, which we have forgotten. And that many of the human problems that we face today have started with this moment when we have pulled ourselves out of the food chain and we have put up this separation between ourselves and the rest of nature, thinking we as humans can control nature and we are no longer a part of it. And that's very much a Western worldview, that we are separated from nature and that we can actually control it. And I wanted to contrast this worldview because Hunter arrives in Africa with this idea that how he sees the world and his morale and his ethics are the best way, if not the only way, to see the world, suddenly has to, or is confronted with this culture where humans see themselves as part of nature, where they see life and death as a more natural thing, where they see that they could also still be prey, and in any case they don't place themselves above nature. And how these two cultures actually collide was something that fascinated me.
And there are certain references to, in one of the passages, you say that he looks like a two-headed Shiva, right? That image, how did it come to you? This two-headed Shiva, the god of death.
I like this connecting idea because you have David, who is at that point still alive and walking forwards,
Right.
and his friend, whom he is carrying, who is looking backwards and who has already died, and who is actually, by his death, has enabled David to still be able to walk forward and to eventually go to America. These two sticking together, and at the same time, it has to do also, I think, with there's always this idea coming back of the exchange of the hunter who wants to look into the eyes of the prey. And even after Nkate has died, there is always this eye contact which still stays and which frightens Hunter terribly, because in his concept, as soon as the prey, if it's an animal or a person, is dead, it does not look back anymore. But the problem with this dead boy is that even after he has died, he is still looking back at Hunter, and he is actually asking for an explanation of this action, or is projecting this action back at Hunter. And every time again, you see Hunter trying to cover his face so that he doesn't have to see these eyes anymore. Because, of course, in Hunter's world, after that, everything stops. It's a final point. So I think it's part of the things that I pick up subconsciously, that this idea that we have, that life stops with that, and after that there is nothing, is one way of seeing the world. It's one concept, but it's not the only concept. And within this whole indigenous African culture, there is also a different perception of what it means to be dead, and that it means actually to return to an energy that stays, that it's not a final point, and that it's also not so connected to an individual. So there is a different perception of what life and death mean. And this two-headedness and the fact that the death of the one makes the rebirth of the other one in a different life in America possible for David is also another concept which could be more ongoing, more cyclical, and therefore also less focused on this individuality. And I found all these contrasts, but very often these decisions you make while you're writing are not so conscious on the theoretical side, but they come from a subconscious level. I always find it very interesting when things like that come back from readers, because then I think I probably did it on instinct, but of course it makes total sense. There was also, for 2 days ago, I read, someone had read the book for a course of decolonization studies and especially focused on gaze and what is colonial gaze, what is white gaze, how does the way we look at someone define us and the other. And also she came up with many, many theoretical concepts of which I thought it naturally, like as an instinct for me, followed out of the psychology of the character, but it fits with a theoretical frame. And I find it very comforting to read that when it is already written. I'm always very afraid to read all the theory before I start to write, because I'm very afraid that I'll then get a very constructed novel trying to make sure that I do nothing wrong, which theoretically should be so or so.
Very interesting, exploring into fiction and moving towards realities. It's very, very nice. Now, one minor gripe with the novel is Van Heeren for me. He's a fascinating character, but you made it him a closed box completely. You didn't tell us anything about it. Why so?
I think it has to do with the choice of perspective, because you could also say the same about Hunter's wife, for example, about whom we know nearly nothing. Also Van Heeren, we only see him through the eyes of Hunter. And that means that the view we get on these other characters is always, first of all, limited by his experience, and secondly, very subjective. We never get real information. We also have no idea what David really thinks. We only get an insight in what Hunter thinks David thinks. And this was very important for me because it's the only way this trapped structure will work. The reader has to connect with the main character. And with Van Heeren, it was very practical because, of course, Hunter has to believe that Van Heeren is truly his friend and that he can trust him to engage into this manhunt. And the whole betrayal that makes Hunter fall apart only works if we have no idea who Van Heeren really is and if he is good or bad or opportunistic. So he's this very shadowy, shady figure in the background, but we never really get a hold of him. And it's always a choice. I mean, you could write the same book again in a very different way if you would imply all the different perspectives, because then we would, for example, also get an answer to the question, what does Nkate really think about being hunted? What does David really think about having to guide the hunter to his friend? Did the local community or the tribe, did they actually really freely decide to sacrifice this boy? Or were they forced by the whole system that Van Heeren has set up to do so? And were they never free from the beginning? Who has betrayed whom? And it's always, I find it one of the most difficult things when starting on a book is to determine perspective and to decide, where do I hang my camera? Do I want the reader to follow Hunter through my box all the time, or do I want the reader to be allowed to look from the top and see the whole overview of the scene long before the characters know what is happening to them?
No, writing from Hunter's perspective is the right choice. That really, it took the novel to a different level altogether. Had it been multiple perspectives also, I don't think it would have worked so wonderfully well. Right.
I think it would be less painful for the reader. And I wanted to create this friction where the reader is confronted with himself. And this is only possible by this inside perspective, because
Correct.
I think we have gotten so used to violent stories from the news or from reality that we've built a shield against all this violence that comes to us.
Right.
And I think the power of fiction lays precisely in that because we ask the reader to connect emotionally to one of the figures, that we get past this shield, and it is again possible for us to actually aim at the heart and aim at the physical experience of what we are reading without the brain filtering it away and putting it at a safe distance, saying, yeah, I can see what's happening, but it has nothing to do with me.
Yeah. Now, the last question I have come to, that is about the ecological colonialism. What are your comments on the current status of this ecological colonialism? In fact, novel talks about it in detail. Yeah.
I think it is one of the things that we are not so aware of, but this green colonialism that is going on to a large extent is very much alive today. And it's what I play around also in my next novel, The Gift, which is sort of a mirror of Trofee. And where the starting point is that the president of Botswana decides to send 20,000 elephants to Germany so that the Germans can try out themselves how it feels to live with 20,000 animals of this size walking freely in the capital. And also there, the starting point was very real because Botswana at this moment has too many elephants. And European countries have decided, and I find it so strange that we still mix to that extent in inside politics of third countries, that nearly half of Botswana's territory is now nature area, which means that animals are protected, farmers cannot farm there anymore, elephants have to roam freely, which is, of course, from a climate perspective, very beautiful, but it has very real consequences for the people who live there and who cannot enter their farm grounds anymore or who are attacked by these elephants. And we have all these conflicts between elephants and farmers going on because we in Europe decided that it would be nice if nature got more room in Africa. Because, of course, the consequences don't come to us. And if nature suddenly has to get more room in Europe and we do rewilding projects and one wolf accidentally eats one sheep, then there is big drama everywhere. But we find it very logical that we, out of our clear ideas on how the world should look and on nature protection, take decisions in other countries. And I find it also big organizations decide or actually buy and own big pieces of land in African countries where they decide, now this is a nature park. And it all sounds like, oh, wonderful idea until you look at the consequences for the people who actually live there. And I find that a very interesting theme again.
Yeah, you have the English copy with you. Can you just read a couple of paragraphs, a page or so from the book?
We are in the last hunt, and Hunter just woke up and they're about to continue their chase. Shall we go? Without waiting for David's answer, Hunter walks back to the place where they deviated from their path yesterday. He is overwhelmed by the ravine's untouched beauty. Yesterday, in the twilight, that beauty had escaped him. It's only now, as the earth warms up again and unfamiliar fleeting scents fill the ravine, as light plays through the foliage and makes shadow patterns dance across the sand, as life wakes up and the sounds of the day echo between the high cliff sides, that he is fully conscious of the environment in all its splendor. His hunting expeditions have frequently led him to far-flung places, but here, in the shallow rift in the earth, he encounters something he's never seen before. Natural abundance, as it was before civilization. A microcosm in complete balance, untrodden, intact. This is his grandfather's Africa, the Africa of the adventure books of his childhood, G.A. Hunter's Africa, or perhaps Africa as it was before white people arrived. David, who has now caught up with him and is walking ahead of him as before, blends naturally into their surroundings. It is part of them, while he, Hunter, is an alien element here. Probably, he's the first white person who has ever set foot on this ground. He pauses a moment, letting that realization, that probability bordering on certainty, sink in. He, Hunter White, is standing on the edge of a world where no white man has ever walked before. Yet he does not feel like an intruder. However strongly the landscape impresses him, it doesn't inspire any humility in him. On the contrary, the feeling of being the first is enormously exciting. What he's feeling is an explorer's euphoria, or a pioneer's, the sense of claiming this land as his own, simply by setting foot on it. It's the same urge that makes men desire virgins, and at the start of the 21st century, it's a feeling he thought he'd never have again. He's been struggling all his life against the idea that he was born too late, that everything was already discovered, all wilderness already tamed, all game already shot. That now, completely unexpectedly, he has encountered a piece of the world he can make his own because it belongs to nobody, fills him with an almost religious state of bliss. Like a man who after endless wandering has found his calling, he stands there, arms outspread, filling his lungs with air. His air. This perfect piece of creation has been waiting to be discovered since the start of time, waiting for humans, for him. This is his hunting ground. This is where he will hunt his quarry, shoot his trophy, the sixth one, the rarest, the most dangerous.
Is this the sentence about virgin she was offended with?
It's actually what made her so angry, and I found it so interesting, is he is walking there through this land where no one has walked before.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, 1 meter before him, David is walking, and he does not see him because he does not perceive him as human. And I think it's actually in that scene is the whole colonial attitude is in this sentence, that Western civilization has always completely ignored that in all the places where they arrived, people had been living for thousands of years. Civilizations had been flourishing that were maybe 100 times more complex than the civilization they were bringing along, and they are completely blind to it. And then there is this natural reflex that if no one has been there before, and that's precisely the same, I think, with the virgin woman, I can claim it as mine, as if it has no life of itself, as if it has no will of itself. And I found it very interesting that it was my Egyptian translator, and she said, at the moment I was reading it, that's the moment that I nearly threw the book through the room, and that I thought, that is precisely the essential of the whole Western colonial attitude. And that's why I like to read this scene, because it's completely true. Every time I read it, I feel Hunter forget that the boy is standing there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gaea, for giving your time. And hopefully in the first week of February it gets released. We will send you the copies.
Okay, I'm really excited because I'm so happy that this novel will also make it outside Europe, which for me is a very interesting audience and will get different and new responses. And I'm also really looking forward to coming next year. I'm sorry it didn't work this year. It was a bit of unfortunate coincidence, but I'm really looking forward because I would love to come.